All right, now the question then is, all right, shock and awe, where does this come from? And it comes from one of the greatest disasters for America called the Vietnam War, okay? So from 1965 until 1973, there was a civil war in Vietnam between North Vietnam, which was communist, and South Vietnam, which is basically a U.S.-controlled puppet state, okay? And America sent soldiers from 1965 to 1973 to protect South Vietnam from insurgents and rebels. And at the height of this war, 3 million U.S. soldiers had to be deployed, okay? And at the height, in 1969, 500,000 soldiers, U.S. soldiers, were in country to fight against the rebels and the insurgents, okay? 58,000 U.S. soldiers died in this war. 3 million, at least 3 million Vietnamese died in this war. 2 million of them were civilians, innocent civilians, okay? Over 300,000 U.S. soldiers were wounded, okay? They went home without legs, without arms, and they were traumatized. And this was an extremely controversial war in America because they were trying to fight the war using standard military doctrine, mass forces, right? So they instituted something called a draft. So if you were a young American, you had to go fight in this war in Vietnam. But you didn't know why you had to go fight this war. And chances are that you would either die or you would lose a body part in this war. So it became extremely unpopular in America. The other thing is that there were a lot of journalists in Vietnam during this time. And they were reporting on how America was killing Vietnamese for no reason. So the most famous story is something called the My Lai massacre, where American soldiers went into a Vietnamese village and killed everyone there, okay? 300 people, 400 people, okay? And this was happening actually quite a lot. So there was widespread anger and protest in America at this time, which ultimately forced America to withdraw in 1973, okay? And the U.S. military was very angry about this war. Because the thing about generals is they don't like to lose wars, okay? When they fight wars, they want to win at all costs. And they felt that they were betrayed by the country. They were fighting hard to maintain the American empire, to fight against communism. And this was bringing wealth, power, and prestige to America. But the American people, the American politicians, the American democracy, republic, refused to make the necessary sacrifices in order to maintain this empire. And so many American generals felt betrayed by what happened in Vietnam. Okay? Now, there's a very famous incident during this war called the Pentagon Papers. Okay? In 1971. In 1971, a group of American analysts, okay, these are military analysts working in the military. They secretly got together and they tried to compose a secret history of the Vietnam War. And this was called the Pentagon Papers. And this was meant to be classified. This was not meant to be read by the public. But one of them, Daniel Ellsberg, leaked it to the newspapers, Washington Post and New York Times. And they published it. And people were angry by the Pentagon Papers because what the Pentagon Papers said is, one, America has been secretly fighting this war for a long time. Okay? So many presidents, including Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Lyndon Johnson, were expending this war without public approval, without congressional approval, okay? So there was a lot of deception. That's the first thing. Second thing is that the politicians, the presidents, knew this war was not winnable. you couldn't win this war. Okay? And the reason why is that these Vietnamese peasants, they were unbeatable. Because what they were doing was they were digging tunnels underground. And then when American soldiers were coming, they would just pop out of these tunnels, shoot at them, and then disappear back into the tunnels, okay? It was like as though they could swim underground. They were not beatable. Second thing is that they had an unlimited supply of weapons. And you're like, wait a minute. These peasants don't have weapons. And the answer is they got these weapons from their enemies. Okay? So the first thing is that these soldiers, these American soldiers, were in the jungle and they were carrying backpacks of ammunition. Right? And sometimes they would lose a fight or they would run away in the jungle because it's very hard to carry these backpacks of ammunition, right? They would drop these ammunition and guess what? You're now arming the enemy, right? Because these peasants would pick up these ammo and use it themselves. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is that the U.S. military dropped more bombs on Vietnam than in World War II combined, okay? More bombs were dropped in Vietnam than in World War II combined, okay? Does that make sense? And about 20% of these bombs didn't explode. And if they didn't explode, the enemy could pick them up and transform them into landmines. And it was these landmines that were killing more Americans than anything else. Okay, that's the second thing. And the third thing was that the South Vietnamese army was extremely corrupt. So they were taking these American weapons and selling them to the rebels. Okay? So then the question then is, if you can't really see this enemy, they're everywhere, okay? They can swim underground. And if you're supplying them yourself, so no matter how much weapons you can bring into this country, how are you going to win this war? The other thing is that these peasants were getting angry at you because obviously in this war you're killing a lot of innocent people, right? Who happens to be their brothers, their sisters, their children, their parents. Okay? So as this war was dragging on, the Vietnamese were becoming more embittered and more angry. So there's no way you were going to win this war. Okay? That's a Pentagon paper, second thing. The third thing is, okay, the question then is, if these American presidents, these American leaders know for a fact that this war cannot be won, why were they fighting this war? Why were they continuing to fight this war? And the answer is, unfortunately, the answer is credibility. Okay? We don't want to lose face, guys. Okay? We don't want to lose face. If we withdraw from Vietnam, if we admit that peasants in pajamas can beat us, Soviet Union would laugh at us. China would laugh at us. The entire world would laugh at us. We don't want to be laughed at. So that's why we're staying in this war. Okay? So to summarize what the Pentagon Papers said, okay, 3 things. One is that the American government lied to the people and turned this into a major war. That's the first thing. Second thing is that America cannot possibly win this war. Okay? And the third thing is that America's only in this war so to avoid losing face. That's it. There was no strategic purpose. There was no strategic objectives from fighting this war. It was just like, we don't want to lose face. We don't want to be laughed at. That's it. Okay? So obviously, when the Pentagon Papers were released to the public, everyone was angry. Okay? And the anger was so tremendous that America had no choice but to ultimately withdraw from the war. And so the Pentagon felt betrayed by democracy. The politicians were more concerned about winning elections than about winning wars, okay? People could protest and defy the military. They refused to make the sacrifices necessary to win this war. And the media could insult the military. So there were many in the military who thought that, listen, if we are to maintain the empire, we need to divorce the empire from democracy. Okay? Empire and democracy do not get along. If we want to win a war, our greatest enemy is not the enemy, but democracy in America. And that's why you have shock and awe. Right? Because the entire point of shock and awe is to minimize casualties. And if there are casualties, you can't see them because they're all blown up. Right? And it's quick, so it's impossible for people to start to get angry, okay? Shock and awe means that America no longer has to make any sacrifices. You no longer need the consent of the people to fight the war. You don't even need congressional approval to fight the war. You can now escape the shackles of democracy in order to do what you must to protect the American empire. Okay? Does that make sense? So shock and awe was really a response to Vietnam War. And what shock and awe means is that the empire is no longer burdened by democracy. Special forces can go and do what they must without any oversight and consent from the people. Okay? Does that make sense, guys? Okay, so shock and awe is really a fear of empire. What America must do in order to maintain its empire around the world. Any questions before I move on about this?
So shock and awe is like the earliest only kind of work in the Iraq War. So will it like help America lose in other wars?
Okay, so Celine asked a great question, which is, okay, I make the argument that shock and awe only works in Iraq, right? And what would happen in other wars? Okay, so the thing about America for the past 20 years is it's been mainly fighting wars in the Middle East. And it turns out the entire Middle East is a desert, okay? All right, so this shock and awe policy has had tremendous success in Iraq and then in Libya. Okay, because America overthrew Gaddafi in Libya. And it's also had some success in Syria as well. Okay, so from the perspective of America, we're really only fighting wars in a desert. Shock and awe is fine. Okay? But next class, we'll discuss Iran. And Iran is not a desert, it's mountains. And I'll show you that shock and awe is not going to work in Iran. Okay, but that's next class. Okay, does that make sense? All right. Any more questions?
Like in the Iraq War, after America beat Saddam Hussein, there was still a lot of fighting after they won because they couldn't control the country.
Yeah.
So shock and awe isn't effective in like these types of conflicts.
Yeah. Okay. So Jack makes a great point, which is okay. Yeah, but most people would say that America lost the Iraq War because of the insurgency, right? Okay, so, that's a great point, okay? You can make the point that America, for the past 20 years, have lost all wars in Iraq and Afghanistan because they have not been able to control the insurgency, okay? But the problem with this is that shock and awe, it's not designed to stabilize countries. Shock and awe is meant to topple and destroy countries. Do you understand? And so the argument can be made that the real intention of shock and awe is to make sure that no power in the Middle East can arise to challenge America's supremacy. Okay? So, yeah, in Iraq, the insurgents ultimately won, but is Iraq a functional state? And the answer is no, right? Is Libya a functional state? No. There's still civil war going on in Syria, all right? So that's a great point, okay? And it comes down to what is the ultimate design and intention of the empire? Is it to replace regimes or is it to destroy countries? And you make the argument that shotgun law is really designed to destroy countries and not to replace regimes, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, now, what's important to understand is that one of the theories of the invasion of Iraq is to bring democracy to the country, okay? But the problem with that is, from the start, they did everything wrong, okay? So first thing is, they really didn't have enough soldiers to maintain peace, right, in the country, so there was a lot of looting. So the entire country broke down. Second thing is that during the air campaign, America destroyed all the infrastructure necessary for society, okay? So including water supply, including electricity grid. Why would you do that if your intention was to bring democracy to the country, right? The third thing is that the very first thing the American government did when they took control over Iraq is something called de-Ba'athification, okay? Which is to say that if you used to work for the old government, you're now out of a job. Hey, the Iraqi military, you're now disbanded. But, and then the question then is, if your ultimate objective is to bring democracy to the country, why would you destroy all political infrastructure in the country? Why would you destroy the ability for the country to govern itself as well as to maintain order, as well as to feed the population? Why would you do that? Okay? So an argument can be made that the real intention was not to bring democracy to Iraq, it was just to destroy Iraq, to maintain American supremacy, as well as to teach others a lesson. Don't mess with us, we'll come and destroy you. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, but this is something we will discuss later on, okay, in another class, okay? All right, let's now move to the last topic, which is the theory of empire. So, this is not the first theory of empire America had. It's actually the second theory of empire. The first theory of empire was in 1991. Remember that in 1991, America launched an attack against Saddam Hussein because Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, right? So at that time, 1991, the Soviet Union had collapsed. America was the only hegemon, was the only power, and it presented a new theory of empire, how America will rule the world, okay? So the first idea is limited strategic goals or objectives, okay? So, for example, in 2003, when America invaded Iraq, its strategic goals were pretty unachievable, okay? It was basically like, we're going to bring democracy and peace to Iraq and the Middle East, okay? Whereas in the Persian Gulf War, led by the father, right, George Herbert Walker Bush, the first and only goal was to remove Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. That's it, okay? We're not going to go to Iraq and topple Saddam Hussein. We're not going to inflict punishment on Saddam Hussein. All we want to do is remove him from Kuwait, okay? That's the first thing. Second thing is that America did so with a coalition of countries, okay? Dozens of other countries were part of the war. And America played a leading role, but it also had to defer to its partners, okay? So, for example, countries like Saudi Arabia, who participated in the war, were like, there's no way we'll topple Saddam Hussein. We'll only stop at Kuwait, okay? So the United States deferred to its partners, okay? And the third thing was, and this is the most important, is that the ultimate leader was the United Nations. The United States had to go and make a case to the United Nations. And the United Nations gave its consent to the military action, okay? So the United States made the argument that this is not a U.S. military action, it is a UN military action, okay? And so the important principle is to maintain the rules-based international order, okay? So what America said at that point is, yeah, I know we are the greatest power in the world. I know the Soviet Union has collapsed. I know that militarily no one can challenge us. But with this power comes great responsibility. we must show humility. We must show discipline. We must show restraint. Our priority will be to maintain the national rules-based order because this will bring prosperity, freedom, and stability to everyone. Okay? And that means that if we use the military, it will only because it's the last resort, the last option, and only for a limited strategic objective. We will only do so with partners. And we will only do so under the umbrella of UN authority. Okay? So this is the first theory of empire. If you think about it, wow, great. What a wonderful world, right? Here's the question then. Why did America not do this anymore? Why did it switch to shock and awe? Shock and awe is basically unlimited strategic goals, unilateral military action, right? We America will do this by ourselves. We don't really need anyone. Okay? And then America is just basically bowling. We make the rules. Why did America do this? Why this transition from the first theory of empire, which is great, it would allow America to rule the world forever, to now the second theory of empire, which is pissing the entire world off? Why? Okay, so this is really hard to understand, okay? But let's use an analogy, okay? So Jack is my son, okay? And I'm a billionaire. I have $10 billion. Why do I have $10 billion? It's because, one, I'm smart, okay? I'm smarter than everyone else. Two, I work really hard, okay? And three, I bribed a lot of politicians. So I have $10 billion. But I'm like 95 years old. And I know I'm going to die, okay? So I invite Jack, who's my son, to dinner. And I say to Jack, I love you and I want what's best for you. I'm going to die very soon and you will inherit my empire. Okay? And I want you to know that you don't have to worry about anything, Jack, because I have 100 advisors who control this empire, who manage this empire. And they are great. They're experienced, they're loyal, they're strategic. Every year, Jack, they make 10% for us, okay? So $10 billion, they make $1 billion for us every year. When I go, they're still going to manage this empire for us. And you know what? They're going to give you, every year, Jack, $100 million to do whatever you want. You want to go by an airplane? Do that. You want to go by an island? Do that. You want to party with movie stars? Do that. You can do whatever you want. Okay? So, Jack, as my last wish, as my dying wish, I want you, Jack, my son, who I love, to promise me that after I die, you will listen to my 100 advisors. Okay? So, Jack, do you promise me? You promise me, right? And then I die. And then what is the first thing that Jack will do? The very first thing he will do. Come on, guys, it's not hard. Your first thing you will do, okay, is fire everyone. Get out of here, okay? What's the second thing you will do? You're going to hire all your friends, Jack, okay? You're going to hire all your friends, okay? And what's the third thing you're going to do? You're going to do something really stupid, okay? You'll be like, you know what? My dad only made $10 billion. Those advisors only make 10% a year. I'm going to invest in Bitcoin. I'm going to invest in AI. I'm going to invest in the Chinese stock market, the Chinese real estate market, and make $100 billion, okay? And then he loses all the money. You understand? All right? This happens all the time, guys, okay? Right? Ask yourself, if your dad were rich and he was about to leave you a lot of money, would you listen to professional people? No, you'd be like, no, I want to have fun, okay? So the question then is, the first theory of empire, okay, which said that for America to maintain its empire, it must demonstrate to the world humility, discipline, and restraint. Why did they get rid of this and move to shock and awe, which is like, we'll do anything we want? Why? Why? Why would they do that? Because it's fun. Okay, do you understand? What is the point of having an empire if you cannot blow things up for no reason? There's no point. We have the greatest military in the world. Let's just blow things up for like no reason, okay? All right? Now, there are 3 fundamental problems with shock and awe, okay? The first problem is that you become overcommitted. Okay, do you understand? You believe that shock and awe allows you to be God. You can be anywhere at once fighting all wars, okay? You're overcommitted. Second is you lack strategic focus. Meaning that you actually don't have a plan. You don't know what you want to do with this empire. You just want to maintain this empire, okay? So you don't actually have a strategy in place, okay? And the third thing is hubris. You don't think anyone can challenge you. You don't think you can lose a war, okay? And so the idea of hubris is this. Right now, America has this huge empire, and it's refusing to spend the necessary resources to protect the empire. So for example, the US Navy, okay? In 1945, it had 7,600 ships. Today, guess what, guys? It has 475. These 475 ships must go around all around the world to protect shipping lanes, okay? The US military in 1991, during the first Persian Gulf War, had 2 million soldiers. Today it has 1.3 million soldiers. Okay? So, in other words, if America ever fights a war, a major war, it's going to have a lot of problems. The other thing is that America doesn't even have manufacturing capacity anymore, okay? It doesn't have any factories anymore, which means that if it fights a war, it can't fight a war for a very long time. So the example is that for every ship that America makes, China can make 300 ships. Okay? America no longer has this manufacturing capacity that it had during World War II, okay? So in other words, why will the military agree to the stupid war in Iran? Because it's overcommitted, it has no strategy, and it's because it's arrogant. All right? And the military is like this because of what happened in 2003, shock and awe.